in the hush of ages past, before the world was mapped and measured. A legend was born in the heart of Middle-earth, a realm where shadows and starlight wove the fabric of destiny. Here, kingdoms of elves glimmered in ancient forests. Dwarves carved halls of stone beneath mountains, and men rose and fell with the turning of the ages. But it was the quiet, pastoral Shire, with its rolling hills and unassuming hobbits, that would become the unlikely crucible of a tale that would shake the foundations of the world. The Lord of the Rings is no ordinary story. It is an epic song of friendship and betrayal, of courage and despair, of love unspoken and sacrifice remembered beyond the span of mortal lives. This is the story of how the smallest of beings bore the heaviest of burdens. This is the story of the One Ring, and the war for the very soul of the world. It is the saga of the One Ring, a simple golden band that carries within it the malice of its maker. Sauron the Deceiver, and the fate of all who dwell in Middle-earth. The Lord of the Rings grew from a sequel to The Hobbit into a towering epic that redefined fantasy literature. The Shire is preparing for a celebration, blissfully unaware that an ancient evil stirs in distant lands. The ring has awakened, and with it, the dark designs of Sauron. From this gentle beginning, storm will gather, one that will sweep heroes and villains alike across the fields of Middle-earth toward a destiny written in flame and shadow. Tolkien wove languages, mythologies, and the echoes of his own life's hardships into a tapestry of such depth and beauty that it has inspired generations. This is not merely a tale of swords and sorcery, but of the human spirit, of resilience in the face of darkness, of loyalty tested and love renewed, and of the quiet strength that dwells in the least of us. For in the forging of this ring, the Dark Lord bound the wills of elves, dwarves and men, seeking dominion over all free peoples. Yet hope lingered in the hearts of the small and the humble. In the long years after Sauron's first fall, the ring was lost to the deep currents of time, only to be found by an unremarkable creature who would carry it into the shadows of legend. The story that unfolds is both a journey and a reckoning, a march from the safe green hills of the Shire to the blackened wastes of Mordor, where fire and ruin await. Penned by J.R.R. Tolkien, across the troubled decades surrounding the Second World War, as we begin Book I, The Ring sets out, we step into a world on the brink of great change. This is the story of Frodo Baggins and the Company of the Ring. The dawn broke soft and golden over the green hills of the Shire, spilling sunlight across hedgerows and tilled fields, waking a land blissfully unaware of the ancient darkness stirring beyond its borders. It was a morning alive with birdsong, the scent of damp earth, and the rustling of leaves. But for those who knew the folk of Hobbiton, it wasn't just any morning, it was the day of Bilbo Baggins' 11th birthday. Bilbo's party had become the talk of the Shire long before the invitations were delivered. The gaffer, Sam Gamgee's father, told anyone who would listen that he remembered Bilbo as a boy, odd from the start. He was. Laughter echoed across the fields, and as the afternoon wore on, the party unfurled into a glorious celebration of hobbit life. Songs sung under the shade of old oaks, wheelbarrow races, dancing on the green, and mugs lifted in endless toasts to Bilbo's health. For in his pocket, cool and deceptively small, rested the ring, the same ring he had taken from Gollum long ago. Its presence had grown heavy of late, like a stone pressing on his soul. And as he greeted his guests, there were moments when a shadow flickered across his face, gone before anyone noticed. Every hobbit within 20 miles seemed to have heard of the fireworks, the food, the games, and of course the host himself. Standing atop a small table, his voice rang clear over the hush of the crowd. He slipped his hand into his pocket, and with a final mischievous grin, whispered, "I regret to announce that. Though as I said, Dell of 21 years is far too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable hobbits. I am going." Frodo's life changed forever in that quiet moment. The burden of an ancient evil had passed into his hands. But as the last innocent evening before the darkness returned to Middle-earth, though neither he nor the Shire yet knew how far its shadow would reach, "I am leaving now. Goodbye. Today's my 111th birthday," he declared, pausing for the cheers to subside. His words danced between sincerity and playful jest. his neighbors and friends for their kindness and patience, for putting up with his oddities all these years. Plates crashed to the ground. Lanterns swung wildly. 100 hobbits called his name in confusion, but Bilbo was gone. Upstairs in Bag End, he reappeared with a shimmer, gasping from the shock of the ring's power. He looked around his cozy home, the walls lined with memories of adventures past, and felt both relief and sorrow. Gandalf waited in the shadows, his face grave. The wizard urged Bilbo to leave the ring behind, warning him of its dangerous hold. Bilbo had returned from his adventures 60 years ago with tales of dragons and treasure. And though time had softened the scandal of his journey, whispers still passed from burrow to burrow about his peculiar habits and unhobbit-like wanderlust. Bilbo's love for the ring pulled at him like an undertow, whispering promises of safety and power. But at last his heart, the heart of a true hobbit, won out. With trembling hands, he placed the ring on the mantelpiece, its small golden form gleaming dully in the lamplight. Bilbo gathered his pack, donned his cloak, and stepped into the night, singing softly as he went. The door of Bag End closing behind him for the final time. Now Bilbo was planning something grander than anything the Shire had ever seen. The Wizardess fireworks, rumored to be the greatest ever seen, streaked across the sky in explosions of color. Green dragons chased red comets, shimmering silver swans soared, and golden stars rained, down in patterns that made even the most stoic hobbits gasp. Across the party field, tents rose like bright mushrooms overnight. Tables groaned under the weight of pies, cheeses, roasted meats, and casks of the finest ale. Musicians tuned fiddles, cooks hurried with steaming trays. Gardeners hung lanterns in the trees. And overseeing it all was Bilbo himself, a sprightly figure with a mischievous gleam in his eye, moving about with energy that belied his 111 years. Hobbits arrived by the cartload, wide-eyed children tugging at their parents' hands, elders shuffling in with canes, everyone dressed in their best waistcoats. As dusk fell, Gandalf the Grey arrived in a cart drawn by a great gray horse, his cloak billowing and his eyes twinkling like stars. But amidst the laughter, Bilbo's mind was far away, caught between the joy of his party and a secret that weighed on his heart. Then, at the height of the festivities, Bilbo rose to make his speech. But as he neared the end, a strange light came into his eyes. He slipped the ring onto his finger. A gasp rippled through the crowd as Bilbo vanished. A struggle of will unfolded in the quiet of Bag End's study. Moments later, Frodo arrived to find Gandalf waiting. The wizard's eyes were sad as he handed Frodo the ring, now heavy with unspoken history. And so ended the party that began in laughter and song. A night remembered not just for its fireworks. The days after Bilbo's departure settled over Bag End like the hush after a storm. Frodo Baggins inherited not only his uncle's comfortable hobbit hole and well-stocked pantry, but also the quiet curiosity of the Shire. While his friends aged and filled their homes with children and grandchildren, he stepped into Baggins' warm kitchen, his face shadowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat, his eyes grave. He did not waste time on pleasantries. Gandalf drew Frodo close, and in a voice heavy with the weight of centuries, began to tell the true story of the ring. Frodo remained youthful, his face untouched by lines or weariness, and the whispers of the name Shire passing from orc to goblin in the dark places of the world. He spoke of Gollum, the twisted creature who had once possessed the ring and who had betrayed its secret under torture. And he spoke of the words he had read in ancient scrolls, a rhyme older than memory itself. Only Sam Gamgee, his loyal gardener and closest confidant, noticed how Frodo sometimes sat in quiet thought, his eyes distant, as though listening for something far beyond the fields of the Shire. Neighbors speculated endlessly about why Bilbo had left so suddenly and where he might have gone, but Frodo offered no answers. He kept up appearances, hosting friends and maintaining his garden, yet beneath it all, a subtle unease began to grow. The wizard placed it in the fire, and as the flames licked the gold, strange letters bloomed across its surface. Words in the black speech of Mordor, glowing like embers. He realized that simply possessing the ring endangered everything he loved. Frodo tried to grasp the enormity of it, his mind reeling with fear and disbelief. "What must I do?" he whispered, his voice raw. Its power would draw the Dark Lord's gaze like a beacon, and there would be no peace, no hiding, if it remained in the Shire. It was proof beyond doubt. The air in Bag End seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper, as the ring's true nature was laid bare. Years slipped by, like water over smooth stones. Frodo, unlike most hobbits, seemed unchanged by time. Then one evening Gandalf returned. His arrival was sudden, cloaked in urgency. The ring, he explained, was not merely a curious trinket Bilbo had found in a dark tunnel. Of alliances and betrayals where courage would be measured not in might, but in the quiet resolve to do what was right. Though the night outside was still and calm, the shadow of the past had fallen across the Shire, and nothing would ever be the same again. It was the one ring, forged by Sauron, the Dark Lord, to enslave the free peoples of Middle-earth. A ring of evil will, bound to its master's power, and thought lost when Sauron was defeated long ago. Yet it had survived, passed from hand to hand in shadow and silence, until it found its way into Bilbo's pocket. As Gandalf spoke, the firelight flickered over Frodo's pale face. Horror dawned in his eyes as the pieces fell into place. Bilbo's strange reluctance to let go of the ring. The unsettling feeling Frodo himself felt when he touched it, the whisper of a voice at the edge of hearing. The truth loomed dark and undeniable. The ring was alive with malice, and it wanted to return to its master. Gandalf revealed the signs he had discovered, the growing restlessness in the east rumors of the dark. Lord's servants seeking Baggins' one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. At Gandalf's urging, Frodo brought out the ring. Terror settled over Frodo. The safety of the Shire, the warmth of its gentle hills and peaceful folk, suddenly felt fragile. Gandalf's eyes softened as he looked at Frodo, a small hobbit born into a quiet land, now chosen by fate to carry a burden older than his race. And so began Frodo's awakening to a world beyond the hedgerows, a world of ancient wars and hidden evils. Dawn broke gentle and pale across Hobbiton, as though the sun itself hesitated to disturb the stillness blanketing the Shire. But inside Bag End, Frodo was already awake, packing quietly. Sam's loyalty was a quiet, unshakable thing, like deep roots holding fast in a storm. When Gandalf caught Sam eavesdropping the night before, the wizard's stern gaze softened into something like hope. For Sam, steadfastness would prove more precious than any sword. The decision had been made. He would leave the Shire, carrying the ring far from his home to keep it, in his beloved land, safe from the gathering darkness. He told himself it was just a holiday to visit distant relatives in Buckland. He paused at the gate, looking back at the round green door, the hill, the gentle smoke rising from chimneys across Hobbiton. The air grew heavy with a smell of decay, the silence pierced only by the sniffing breath of something hunting. The ring in Frodo's pocket grew impossibly heavy, a pulse of temptation urging him to slip it on, to vanish, to hide. But Frodo clenched his fists until his nails bit skin, resisting the whisper in his mind. Unspoken hope, that they might find safety at the journey's end, or the courage to face what waited in the darkness. He felt the Shire itself was saying farewell, every blade of grass whispering his name. It was then that Merry and his pony appeared through the trees. Stars shone cold and clear above, distant and indifferent, while the dark world around them seemed to tighten like a snare. Every rustle, every sigh of wind through the branches felt like something creeping closer. But the hobbits pressed on together, a fragile fellowship bound by friendship, stepping out of the gentle world they had always known and into the gathering storm. Merry, having guessed more than Frodo intended, insisted they take the hidden paths he knew well, the old forest tracks and secret ways beyond Buckleberry Ferry, to throw off any pursuit. But in his heart, he knew the truth. He was stepping onto a road that might never let him return. Sam Gamgee, who had lingered by Frodo's side since Gandalf's visit, was determined not to let his master go alone. The morning of Frodo's departure felt almost ordinary. Birds sang in the hedgerows. A light breeze rustled the flowers in the garden. Yet the weight of secrecy pressed down on him. Even Merry Brandybuck and Pippin Took, his cousins and closest friends, suspected nothing of the true reason for his journey, but they, too, would not be left behind for long. They crossed fields damp with dew, the sky overhead brightening by degrees. The stories seemed like shadows from children's tales. But as the travelers left the well-trodden paths and struck into quiet woods, they heard hoofbeats on the road behind them. The sound came and went like a heartbeat of dread. Their laughter, forced at times, drifted like birdsong over hedgerows as they tried to shake the fear trailing them. Yet already, danger crept behind them. Leaving Bag End was like tearing a piece of his heart from his chest. The trio, Frodo, Sam, and Pippin, slipped down the lanes at first light. Rumors had reached the Shire of black riders on the roads, dark, hooded figures asking after Bagginses in voices cold as midnight. One evening, they hid among the tangled roots of an old tree as a rider appeared. Black cloak billowing, faceless helm glinting faintly in the moonlight. When the rider passed, the hobbits' breaths shuddered free, and they staggered from the underbrush, shaken to the bone. They hurried on, deeper into the woods as night fell. Though their feet carried them farther from home with each mile, their hearts held a single. Morning mist clung low over the fields as Frodo, Sam, and Pippin hurried along the secret country tracks Merry had led them to. The world around them was hushed, as if the Shire itself held its breath. Merry guided them along forgotten byways and narrow trails, winding through hedgerows and over quiet pastures, keeping them well away from the main roads where the riders might prowl. It was a world they knew, a world that had always felt safe, and the hobbits tried to draw courage from it as they pressed on, yet exhaustion began to drag at their steps, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. Now, with darkness chasing at their heels, the sturdy farm felt almost like a haven. By afternoon, even Pippin's usual cheer had faded into worried silence. His voice dropped low as he spoke, the firelight casting deep shadows across his face. Night had fallen fully by the time they climbed aboard, stars glinting like cold spears above. They reached the dock just as hooves clattered faintly on the distant road behind them. Without hesitation, they unmoored the ferry and pushed off. But bound by a growing resolve that would carry them far beyond the borders of their gentle home, the ferry drifted out onto the dark water, moonlight rippling across the river's surface. As they left the western shore behind, every mile the wagon rolled felt like another heartbeat closer to escape, yet also another step deeper into peril. The hobbits listened wide-eyed, the chill of danger settling even deeper in their bones. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the hobbits. The safety was fleeting, fragile, yet it was enough for a few precious breaths. Ahead lay Crick Hollow and a borrowed house where they might rest for a night. But in their hearts, they knew rest could never truly return until the burden of the ring was lifted. The memory of the Black Riders' chilling presence the night before still lingered like a dark fog in their minds. Their path was far from direct. Farmer Maggot himself appeared soon after, broad-shouldered and weathered, carrying a stout stick. At first, suspicion darkened his eyes, but when he recognized Frodo, now grown, his face softened with a mix of gruff amusement and concern. But the land itself offered small comforts. The smell of ripe fields, the shimmer of morning dew on spiderwebs, the warm golden light breaking through drifting clouds, the rich smell of mushrooms cooking in butter wrapped around them like a comforting blanket, stirring both hunger and a fleeting sense of peace. Over generous plates piled high with mushrooms, bacon, and fresh bread, they told Maggot enough of the truth to convey their urgency without exposing the ring's secret. Finally, they reached the edge of Farmer Maggotus' lands, a place Frodo had once avoided with a child. His terror after a youthful misadventure involving stolen mushrooms and a pack of sharp-toothed dogs. Creeping across the fields, they startled Maggot's dogs, which burst from the shadows, barking furiously. The hobbits were ushered into the farmhouse where warmth radiated from a crackling hearth. Farmer Maggot shared what he knew. Strange folk had indeed come through the Shire, cloaked and silent, asking questions about a Baggins traveling east. Determined to help, Maggot offered them a ride in his wagon to Buckleberry Ferry, the quickest way across the Brandywine River and into the relative safety of Buckland. As they approached the ferry landing, the air felt thick with unseen menace. On the far bank, they climbed ashore into Buckland, the Brandywines wide. Whispering current now a thin shield between them and the riders. And so they stepped into the shadows of Buckland, their fellowship still small and untested. The ferry scraped softly against the far bank, and the hobbits tumbled out into the chill night air of Buckland. Frodo, Sam, Pippin felt an almost giddy relief at having crossed the Brandywine River, its dark waters now separating them from the terrors stalking the Shire's roads. Yet the journey was far from over. Crick Hollow, Frodo's temporary refuge, waited just beyond the hedgerows, promising a brief, uneasy sanctuary. In the small, snug house Frodo had purchased under the pretense of moving to Buckland, candles flickered in the windows. They knew about his plans to leave the Shire. They knew his fear was not rooted in family disputes or idle whims, but in something dark and perilous. His sudden plans to sell Bag End the hints of danger that had shadowed his steps. They were resolved to share his burden, come what may. Rather, it was a pledge of love, a stubborn refusal to abandon their friend to a darkness none of them fully understood. Fatty would stay behind at Crick Hollow to maintain the illusion that Frodo remained in Buckland, a decoy to buy them precious time. Outside, the night lay thick and watchful, the dark trees of the old forest rising on the horizon like a wall of silent sentinels. Yet within the walls of Crick Hollow, friendship shone fiercely, a light to carry them into the shadows that awaited beyond the Brandywine's narrow moonlit ribbon. His sacrifice, though quieter than marching to Mordor, was no less brave. The strength of their commitment filled the small sitting room, banishing shadows for a moment with the bright light of hobbit courage. Even Sam, who had been sworn by Gandalf to accompany Frodo, realized with wonder that their little conspiracy of friendship had been plotting to stand by Frodo all along. They spoke of the Black Rider's whispers, the unsettling rumors drifting through Buckland. Frodo's heart sank, yet in their determined faces he saw no anger, only steadfast loyalty. And they knew he had been hiding the truth from them. Mary, who had parted from them earlier to prepare the house, greeted them with hot baths, soft towels. The mood shifted from warm camaraderie to tense expectation. Mary's eyes, bright and keen, fixed on Frodo with unsettling clarity. Pippin fidgeted but wore a determined expression. Fatia looked pale but resolute. In a supper that almost felt like the old days before dread had begun to cloud their hearts. Laughter came easier around the table, yet behind every smile lingered the weight of what they carried and what they fled. When the meal was over, Mary, Pippin, and Fatty Bolger, another friend who had quietly joined them, gathered Frodo and Sam in the sitting room. Frodo tried to wave them off with half-truths and vague assurances, but Mary's voice cut through the denials like a blade. They knew. A stunned silence fell as Mary revealed how he and Pippin had pieced together the puzzle of Frodo's worries. His secret meetings with Gandalf, and Mary said the words Frodo least expected. They would not let him go alone. Their conspiracy was unmasked, but not to betray him. Together they laid plans for the morning, to strike out east into the old forest, before their movements could be discovered. As the candles burned low, the hobbits settled into restless sleep. A pale dawn crept over Buckland, brushing the treetops with ghostly light as Frodo, Sam, Mary, and Pippin shouldered their packs. The air smelled of damp earth and distant rain. They left Crick Hollow quietly, hearts pounding with urgency and the weight of what lay ahead. Tales of walking trees and sinister shadows haunted Buckland's folk. Roots snaked across the forest floor, tripping them, almost as if the trees themselves reached out to halt their progress. As the morning wore on, the forest grew ever darker, the canopy closing overhead like a shroud. They realized with dawning dread that the forest was steering them, but insistently southwards, not toward their planned escape east. Panic seized him as he saw Frodo floundering helplessly. While Mary and Pippin struggled for breath, pinned inside the tree's cold, grasping wood, he hacked futilely at the willow with his small blade, but it only seemed to anger the tree, which groaned and squeezed tighter. Desperate, Sam remembered the fire, and he piled brushwood against the trunk, striking a spark. Flames licked the bark, and the tree shuddered, releasing a choked gasp from within. The forest was older than memory, older even than the Shire itself, and it did not welcome intruders. Tom Bombadil appeared, a strange figure clad in blue and yellow, with a feather in his hat and a laugh like a bubbling brook. He shepherded the hobbits away from the willow shadow with a jaunty wave, leading them through tangled paths until they reached his bright, welcoming house nestled in a clearing where the gloom of the old forest dared not enter. They realized they had not merely crossed into the old forest, but into a world older and stranger than they had ever imagined. and they were alive only because of the mysterious laughing master who now set bread, honey, and golden butter before them, as if he had been expecting guests all along. He danced forward, singing words of command to Old Man Willow in a language older than the Shire. The great tree groaned, and with a creaking sigh released Merry and Pippin, who tumbled out, gasping into the sunlight. It was a place of sullen resentment and deep whispering malice. The moment the hobbits stepped through the hedge, the great barrier, Bucklanders had raised against the forest's creeping edge, the air turned heavy and still. Even the birdsong ceased, as if the forest itself was listening. Fatty Bolger watched from the door, pale but resolute, ready to play his part as the decoy. The old forest loomed before them, its dark boughs tangled like the fingers of some ancient brooding giant. Pippin, stumbling over a route, snapped at Merry. Frodo felt a rising sense of panic. Sam's eyes darted nervously among the shadows. It seemed the old forest was alive with a cold, watchful anger. Few hobbits dared venture into these woods. Its gnarled trunk stretched wide, and its branches drooped low like beckoning arms. Exhausted, the hobbits rested on the mossy bank, but the moment weariness overcame them, a sinister enchantment took hold. Frodo slipped into a dreamless stupor. Sam nodded off beside him. Pippin, sitting too close to the trunk, suddenly found himself being swallowed by a crack in the willow's bark. Merry, too, was dragged by unseen forces, wedged fast in a root. Their path wound among gnarled oaks and towering beeches, trunks twisted into unnatural shapes. An oppressive gloom settled in. The hobbits' cheerful spirits from the night before ebbed into frustration and fear. At last they came upon a clear, dark pool at the base of a massive ancient willow. Old Man Willow? Sam woke with a start to the muffled cries of his friends. Just then, from the depths of the forest, a voice rose in bright, nonsensical song, clear and merry, a shocking contrast to the forest's heavy silence. Tom Bombadil seemed at once harmless and impossibly powerful, a being untouched by the fearsome will of the forest. There, as afternoon light filtered through open windows, the hobbits sank into chairs by the hearth. Sunlight spilled into the clearing like liquid gold, banishing the shadows that clung to the hobbits' minds. Tom Bombadil's house stood bright and cheerful among the gloom of the old forest, walls of white stone. The house was simple, yet brimming with an ancient, joyful magic. Polished wood beams, bright woven rugs, and tables set with heaping platters of food. Goldberry greeted them with a voice like gentle rain, and Tom's laughter rang out as he bustled about, laying out the evening meal. Frodo hesitated but found himself confiding the entire story. The ring, Gandalf's warning, the black riders who hunted them. When he showed Tom the ring, it seemed to vanish from his palm before their eyes, yet Tom only chuckled. Goldberry's voice rose in shimmering harmony, and Frodo felt, for the first time in many days, the light of the world could never truly be extinguished. But time pressed on. As the third morning dawned bright and clear, Tom guided them back to the forest's edge. He taught them a rhyme to call him should they find themselves in peril. He slipped the ring on his own finger, but to the hobbit's amazement, he did not disappear. Tom flipped it in the air like a trinket, then returned it to Frodo, without the slightest hint of corruption or fear. The hobbits, worn to the bone, ate until their hearts lifted and their fears melted away. Ahead lay the Barrow-Downs, a land of ancient burial mounds where shadows longer and colder than any in the old forest waited. The hobbits stepped forward, hearts buoyed by the memory of Tom's laughter, but knowing their journey into darkness had only just begun. A roof of green thatch and a garden bursting with wildflowers that swayed to some secret song of the earth. At the door stood Goldberry, radiant and serene, with hair like a river of sunlight. She was the River Daughter, Tom's fair lady, and her presence filled the hobbits with wonder. Inside, warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. That night, they lay in soft beds, each in a room of their own, drifting into dreams free of dread. No black rider's snuffling breath haunted them. No groping willow threatened them. In the safety of Tom's house, the world outside seemed like a fading nightmare. But in the morning, the air carried a strange hush. Rain fell steady and soft, drumming on the roof and windows. Tom's songs wove through the halls, filling every room with lightness, even as storm clouds gathered beyond the forest. Over a breakfast of warm bread and golden honey, Tom urged them to speak of their journey. The ring held no sway over Tom Bombadil. He was older than the Shire, older than the Old Forest, perhaps older than the very lands of Middle-earth themselves. His power lay outside the wars of elves and men, beyond the reach of Sauron's shadow. It was a glimpse of a world that would endure long after even the greatest kings and rings had passed into legend. On the second night, Tom taught them ancient songs of the forest and river. Ho, Tom Bombadil, Tom Bombadillo, by water, wood, and hill, by red and willow. With a final wave, Tom and Goldberry faded into the sunlight and trees, leaving the hobbits at the borders of a wilder, darker road. A pale mist drifted across the rolling hills of the Barrow-Downs as the hobbits stepped beyond the forest's shelter. The air smelled of damp earth and old stone. A chill seeped into their bones. But by noon, a white fog rose from the ground, thickening until they could barely see the path before them. Hills loomed and vanished. Stones jutted like broken teeth from the grass. Sam called for Frodo, but his voice was swallowed by the muffling mist. A tall, pale figure rose from the far end of the barrow, a barrow-wight, with eyes like icy stars and a voice like the grave. It moved toward them, shadows dancing at its feet. Frodo's hand trembled as it closed around his sword hilt. He nearly gave in to despair. But then he remembered Tom's rhyme. Stones cracked, shadows fled. Tom Bombadil appeared, his eyes blazing with a merry light. He swept into the barrow, singing ancient words of power. Small but keen, they gleamed with a cold light, a reminder that even in the deepest dark, ancient hope endured. The wight's howl of rage turned into a fading wisp of cold mist, and then it was gone. Ahead lay the lands of men and the distant shadows of Mordor. Behind them, the safety of the Shire was already a dream fading into memory. One by one, the hobbits lost sight of each other, wandering alone among the dead. He guided them back into the light of the morning, where the mist burned away under the sun's first true rays. On the hillside, Tom laid out fresh clothes and food from his own stores, and the hobbits wept with relief. Low green mounds dotted the landscape like slumbering beasts, each one an ancient tomb from a time before the kingdoms of men. He sank down against a tall standing stone, exhaustion and terror crashing over him. The fog coiled around him like ghostly fingers, and he slipped into darkness. Though the morning sun glowed weakly overhead, a deep unease settled on the travelers. It was as if the land itself watched them with cold, unseen eyes. At first, they walked briskly, eager to leave the barrows behind before dusk. Frodo stumbled forward, heart pounding, called for his friends, but only silence answered. When he awoke, Frodo found himself inside a cold stone chamber. Pale light trickled through cracks above, illuminating a long barrow filled with ancient treasures, swords rusted with age, crowns of tarnished silver, and skeletal forms draped in rotting robes. His friends lay beside him, unmoving, pale as death, their faces shadowed under strange circlets of gold. A voice older than the hills whispered through the gloom, chanting in a language thick with dread. With a desperate breath, he cried out, "Ho, Tom Bombadillo, Tom Bombadillo, by water, wood, and hill, by reed and willow." The barrow shuddered. A bright voice answered in song, growing louder until it filled the chamber like sunlight bursting through storm clouds. Tom helped the hobbits from the barrow, wrapping them in warm cloaks. Before they parted again, Tom gave them each a dagger from the barrow's hoard, blades of Westerness, forged long ago to fight the servants of the Dark Lord. With many farewells and a final wave, Tom left them standing on the great East Road, alone at last. The hobbits took their first steps toward Bree, their hearts heavier than ever. But in their hands, they carried blades that could cut the very cords of the dark. Evening shadows fell over the small town of Bree, where stone walls rose around a jumble of houses and inns clustered at the crossroads of the Great East Road and the Greenway. Lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk, lighting cobbled streets where Breemen and hobbits from nearby villages mingled uneasily. To Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, Bree felt both strange and strangely familiar. A place where hobbits lived alongside big folk, yet with a wary distance that hinted at old tensions. Hobbits, he exclaimed, bowing them into a cozy private parlor. Frodo, uneasy but trying to stay inconspicuous, joined Pippin and Sam in the common room. But as he slipped, the ring on its chain swung free, and in a moment of terror, Frodo vanished before everyone's eyes. Gasps filled the room. Mugs crashed to the floor. Voices rose in confusion and fear. He introduced himself as Strider, a ranger of the north. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of wild lands and secret roads. He warned Frodo that enemies were already closing in, and the Prancing Pony's walls would not protect them for long. Their laughter and song flowed around them, a brief respite from the shadows of their journey. The letter S, words burned in Frodo's mind, make for Rivendell as soon as possible. But when Pippin, after one too many drinks, began telling stories of Bilbo, their path would take them beyond the relative safety of Bree, to lands where shadows moved unseen, and where the Nine Riders hunted their every step. In the Shire, Frodo realized with horror that the talk was drawing curious eyes and dangerous ears. He introduced himself with hurried politeness, offering ale and supper. Though his eyes kept darting back to the common room beyond, there, rough men, dwarfs and brahhobbits, smoked and murmured. Stories of strange happenings on the roads, slipping between the clink of mugs. At the center of town stood the Prancing Pony, sign creaking overhead in the breeze, a painted horse dancing merrily on its hind legs. The warm light spilling from its windows promised safety and comfort, and so the hobbits stepped inside. Butterbur, the innkeeper, bustled forward with rosy cheeks and a worried frown. The travelers tried to settle their nerves. Merry went for a walk to stretch his legs. Frodo tried to distract the crowd by leaping onto a table and singing a playful song. He pulled the ring from his finger and felt the weight of what he'd just revealed. In that brief moment, he sensed the cold attention of something far away, as if a searching eye had flickered across the world, reaching toward him. Invisible, Frodo fled into a dark corner, heart pounding. Out of the shadows stepped a tall, hooded figure with sharp eyes that gleamed with both weariness and purpose. As Butterbur burst in, pale and flustered, he thrust a letter into Frodo's hands, a message from Gandalf written long ago, explaining that if Gandalf did not meet them in Bree, they should trust Strider, whose real name was Aragorn. Realizing they had no choice, Frodo and his friends agreed to follow the mysterious ranger into the night. The parlor of the Prancing Pony fell into a hushed tension after the hobbits agreed to trust the grim-faced ranger, who called himself Strider. On the flickering candlelight, Strider outlined the dangers they now faced. The Black Riders were in Bree, and time was slipping through their fingers like sand. Strider's knowledge of the ring and the riders convinced Frodo of his sincerity. But there remained an edge of fear in their hearts. Could they truly trust a man who lived beyond the bounds of civilized lands? His voice, low and urgent, carried the weight of many lonely miles traveled in the wild. He inspected the hobbits' packs and weapons, advising them on how to move quietly and what paths to take. He warned them of eyes and ears eager for gossip. Every careless word could carry two servants of the enemy. At night, they saw fleeting black shapes on distant ridges, heard faint cries carried on the wind. In the darkness, Sam would clutch his sword and Pippin would tremble. But Strider's calm presence kept their fear from becoming panic. He spoke of dark shapes seen on the roads, of people disappearing, and of a growing evil in lands once thought safe. They woke cold and stiff, dew-soaking their blankets, their small fire only a memory. Strider found hidden pools to refill their water and led them by forgotten paths through marshes and over silent hills. By day, the sky seemed too big, the land too empty. By night, every rustle in the brush made them hold their breath. He planned to guide them through the wilderness to Weathertop, an ancient hill, from which they could watch the roads and look for any sign of Gandalf. He sensed it pulsing with its own will, calling out in some silent language to dark things beyond sight. And in Strider's haunted eyes, he glimpsed the burden of a man who had walked many years in the shadows. A man with secrets of his own, yet steadfast in the face of a growing storm, taught them how to walk softly, how to blend with the land, and how to sense danger long before it arrived. Frodo studied Strider's weathered face, the keen eyes shadowed beneath a hood, the marks of hardship etched into his skin. While Butterbur bustled about trying to make amends for the chaos of the night, Strider set his mind to preparing their escape. That night, they made their beds in the parlor, but Strider insisted they not sleep in their assigned rooms. A good thing, too, for under cover of darkness. Strange men crept into the inn and slashed the hobbits' pillows, hoping to kill them in their sleep. At the edge of town, they slipped into the wild, leaving the prancing pony behind like a fading memory of warmth. Ahead lay the open wilderness of Eriador, a vast, lonely land of rolling hills, tangled woods, and deep shadows. When Butterbur discovered the ransacked rooms at dawn, he turned white with horror. But Strider merely nodded, grimly satisfied they'd avoided a deadly trap. Morning in Bree was cool and gray. Strider led them through back alleys and hidden gates to avoid prying eyes. As they traveled, Strider spoke of the days ahead, but there was no shaking the feeling of being hunted. Each morning brought new hardship. Through it all, Frodo felt the ring like a stone against his chest. The journey grew darker with every mile. Strider led the hobbits east. The shadows seemed to thicken around them. The land itself felt old and watchful, as though unseen eyes followed their every step. Each night, the small company huddled close, listening for the soft pad of hoofbeats or the hiss of breath on the wind. At night, Strider recited fragments of old songs, tales of lost kings and ruined kingdoms, his voice low and mournful. It was then that Frodo began to see Strider not just as a ranger. Strider warned them to stay close and keep the fire low, but as the darkness deepened, fear gnawed at them. Frodo felt the ring growing heavier, its pull stronger. Strider leaped between them and the advancing wraiths, brandishing flaming brands from the fire. As he put it on, the world shifted. He saw the Nazgul clearly now, their cloaks falling away to reveal pale, hollow-eyed kings twisted by ancient evil. Their leader, taller and more fearsome than the rest, stepped forward and stabbed Frodo with a blade gleaming with a sickly light. But Frodo's wound festered with a darkness that no healing herb could touch. Strider's face was grim as he inspected the pale hobbit. He knew they had only a short time before the wound's poison carried Frodo into shadow, forever lost to the living world. The Nazgul hesitated, their hissing cries mingling with the crackle of burning wood. But their attention was fixed on Frodo. The ring called to them, and they reached for him with cold, deathly hands. A dreadful sense of being hunted weighed on his soul, as if the darkness itself sought him out. But as a man shaped by legends older than the Shire itself, a man carrying his own burdens of fate, Strider's voice thundered through the night. Flames slashed through the blackness, and the Nazgul retreated before the ranger's fury. But the damage was done. Frodo lay pale and trembling, the wound burning with a cold beyond any natural frost. In the Black Rider's wake, evil spread like a stain. Strider hoped they might find Gandalf there, or at least some sign of him. But when they reached the summit, the sight chilled them. The ancient watchtower stood silent and broken. Stones blackened as if by fire, and the surrounding ground bore signs of a recent struggle. Gandalf, if he had come, was already gone. News from Bree confirmed their fears. The riders had attacked the inn after their departure, destroying rooms and terrifying the townsfolk. Even Butterbur's courage had nearly failed him, yet Strider kept them moving steadily, never allowing their dread to settle into despair. They passed ancient mounds and silent woods, remnants of a time long forgotten. The days grew colder. They reached the Weather Hills, a range of lonely ridges rising from the empty plains, and climbed toward Weathertop, the tallest hill among them. That night, they camped on the slopes of Weathertop. Suddenly, from the blackness beyond their campfire, came a thin, keening cry. Then another, and another. Like a chorus of nightmares, the voices rose and fell, growing closer. Out of the darkness emerged 5 shadowy shapes, black cloaks billowing, faces pale and terrible in the moonlight. The Nazgul had found them. The hobbits froze, terror rooting them to the ground. In a moment of dreadful weakness, Frodo felt the urge to slip on the ring, to vanish from sight. But the act only betrayed him. A cry tore from Frodo's throat as pain seared his shoulder, and the world fell into darkness. Dawn broke over a silent, haunted hill. The Black Riders were gone for now, driven back by fire and Strider's courage. Ahead lay Rivendell, the last hope for Frodo's life, if they could reach it in time. Time turned against them. Frodo's face grew ashen, his breath shallow. The wound from the Nazgul's blade burned with an icy fire, spreading a creeping darkness through his veins. He called out in fevered delirium, clutching the ring even in his sleep. Sam rarely left his side, eyes wide with worry, his heart breaking as he watched his master fade. Every step forward felt like a desperate gamble against death itself. Strider led them swiftly, but carefully, guiding the hobbits through hidden paths in the wild, avoiding open roads where the Black Riders might lie in wait. Days blurred into nights. Frodo drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by dark dreams of cold crowns, black gates, and whispers that slithered through his mind. Frodo's strength gave out. He looked back to see all 9 Nazgul riding hard, their faces twisted masks of malice. He felt the chill of the river, the warmth of unseen hands lifting him, the distant sound of elven voices singing words of comfort. The last thing he saw was a flicker of pale starlight breaking through the trees above. They urged their mounts into the river, shrieking words of terror. For beyond the river lay Rivendell, the house of Elrond, where light still held fast against the encroaching shadow. Frodo, half aware, raised his hand defiantly and called on Elbereth, the name of the elves' Star Queen, as if to summon one last spark of light against the darkness. On the 4th night after Weathertop, they found Glorfindel, an elf lord sent from Rivendell by Elrond himself. Light shone from Glorfindel like dawn breaking through storm clouds. His mere presence was hope. He examined Frodo's wound with a grave expression. There was no time to lose. The riders were close. Glorfindel placed Frodo on his horse, Asphalloth, and commanded the steed to fly. The white horse raced across the wilds, hooves thundering over hills and through shadowed woods. Frodo felt wind tear at his cloak, the world a blur of light and darkness. In moments of clarity, he glimpsed black shapes pursuing him on the road behind, cloaked figures on dark horses gaining ground. Their chilling cries echoed through the valley. The road narrowed as they reached the ford of Bruinen, a shallow river glittering with pale autumn light. And then the river rose. At Elrond's command, the waters of the Bruinen surged into a wild flood, foaming and roaring down the valley. Waves shaped like white horses, manes crashed over the Black Riders, engulfing them in a furious torrent. Their screams mingled with the thunder of the river as they were swept away, their dark shapes vanishing beneath the raging waters. The world spun and went black for Frodo. Darkness closed around him, but in that darkness, hope lingered.